We just celebrated Father's Day this past weekend, and think about fathers, father figures, and the roles they play in our lives. I think a lot about my father, who is actually a good father. He's not a perfect man, but he definitely cares about not only his kids, but also about doing things that make us successful. Which begs the question of, in my mind, when in popular culture, fathers transformed from a good role model, exemplar, and anchor in the lives of their children to be portrayed now as buffoonish idiots in almost everything that we see. Now, back in when I was younger, there was an admixture of both. I remember, if you think back to the Flintstones, even in the Flintstones, Fred is portrayed as the hapless, witless, self-serving male figure in his household. However, in that cartoon, even though now as an adult I have a lot of other misgivings with it, there were also things that they admitted were weaknesses about Wilma. So a lot of the episodes show them overcoming weaknesses, working things out, and getting back together. It wasn't that he was always portrayed as the bumbling idiot. I hate to mention this because he's fallen out of favor, but he's a really good example. Bill Cosby. In The Cosby Show, whatever you think of him now, he was portrayed as a good father and husband. He had an intelligent wife as well. And rather than it being a competition between the two of them, it was a cooperative mechanism in order to raise their family up to be good people. As opposed to The Simpsons, where Homer Simpson is portrayed as the completely buffoonish, comedic relief who is the cause of and result of everyone's problems. However, when was the last time you saw a show recently where men were portrayed in a positive light? A few commercials come to mind. There's a reason, and I wrote a letter to them, that I will never use Carvana. Carvana ran this advertisement showing the buffoonish husband standing in a room doing the archaic thing of mapping things out on the wall by hand. And his wife walks in and, "I don't know why you don't use this app. You're a retard." And he says, "Fine, we'll do it your way." Well, I heard that. And now there's this like man bashing that goes on. The great paradox of all of this is that at the same time society bashes men, we have this movement in society by women who are demanding ever increasingly successful men in order to mate with them. So you must ask the question, if men are being given the impression through all of our popular cultural paradigms that men are perceived as inferior by society, what incentive do they have to prove society wrong? There are stories that run out the gamut about how women can't find worthy men. Where have all the good men gone? I can't find a good man. Never in any of those articles are they mentioning a man who has a good work ethic, a man who is possessed of morals, a man who is of good character. They are only looking for men whose goodness also makes the women better too. I recently watched a video on YouTube where a guy showed a dating coach of a woman who was explaining the female version of the hot, crazy dating matrix. And in this particular video, she showed that average was a 7 in the eyes of the women that she was teaching. Okay, now I don't know about you, but if the scale is from 1 to 10, 7 is not average. Okay? I know that in college, because in academia I work there, 7 is average, but that's because that's average for those who have gotten in. There was already a selection mechanism that determined that some people were not ready to come, and then they can't come until they are ready. So those people, by definition, are the way below average because they didn't even make the cut. Okay? But 7 is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 7 is not average. It's 5. And if you look at the male version of the hot, crazy matrix, whether you agree with it or not, that's where men draw the average line, is at 5. But for women, average is above average. There's also another article, I referenced it in response to this video, they did a study on women's ideal wage. And what they did was they created a bunch of synthetic profiles and gave women access to the wages of those individuals. And women reportedly were looking for men who earned 50% more than the average wage. Now, if you go look up the wage data for the United States, the average wage, I think, in the United States is $58,000, which means that women are looking for a man who makes 82 minimum. Okay, and I don't know about you, but there are not a lot of jobs that make that. At least not to start. And since most of the dating and marrying typically occurs between the ages of 20 and 30, how many of those guys are even competing? So what we have now is women who are looking at a world where men have been made to be buffoons, and who also demand that men be paragons without acting like paragons. A lot of women in our society will refer to this not as with the terms that we've discussed in this video so far, but they will use the code word, I'm looking for a guy with ambition. By ambition, they mean that he must be more educated than they are and more wealthy than they are, or they won't even give him the time of day. You see this in the series The Big Bang Theory. Penny has a friend who comes to visit from back in Nebraska or wherever the hell she was from, who is interested in one of the dorky professors that hang out in the apartment next door. And she asks her at one point, how much does a nuclear physicist make? And I can't remember the exchange because I haven't watched the show for years, but it's a show about smart people for stupid people. And she tells her friend how much they make, and she said, well, that's what I thought, so I'll just play with him. Because he doesn't make enough money, even though he has a prestigious title and position, she's not willing to give him the time of day. And this is a country bumpkin. Imagine if she was also educated. Not only would the money not be enough, but he would have to have 3 or 4 PhDs and maybe a Nobel Prize to even get on the list to have a date with her. The biggest problem that this causes, in my eyes, is that women demand that their man be better than they are, but not act as if he was. So he must be smarter and be more wealthy, but not act as if he's their superior. What? Because superior people do act that way because they are that way. It's not because they're condescending, and granted many of them are. I've got plenty of coworkers who talk to me like I'm dumber than a brick of cheese, but that doesn't mean that they're being that way on purpose. Sometimes it's just because they know things and they just can't help it. I have coworkers that I know are really intelligent men who don't know how to talk to regular people. They are used to talking to their peers, and if you're not one of their peers, they will come across as condescending and arrogant, even though all they're doing is speaking in the normal parlance and jargon of their day. You just don't know it. And so if you're taking offense to that, it's simply because you're not part of their circle and you weren't on their radar as a person to begin with. Not because you couldn't be, but because if you're not a nuclear physicist too, why would nuclear physicists be hanging out with you? Unless they had to. So it's not that they're being uber selective of their company, it's that they hang out with people with whom they can have conversations and who share common interests. And if you don't get invited. I don't have any nuclear physicist friends because I don't do nuclear physics. I know a little about radiation and isotopes and reactors, but I'm not one of their peers, and so I don't get invited to those sorts of parties. So if you're going to complain about men and denigrate them, then demand that they offer more than they do, and then complain about the ones who do offer more than you have because they act like they are better than you, you should be prepared for disappointment. There was a movie that came out, and it was a total flop. I don't know why, that's not important, called Mars Needs Moms. Well, Earth needs dads. Earth needs fathers. The greatest determinant about whether or not a person will end up in or stay in poverty is whether or not there are two parents in the home. And I don't care if you're a single mom. This is not to denigrate them and their contributions. I have a mother. I was raised in what you would call a nuclear family. Pardon the nuclear reference. Nuclear, not nuclear. Okay. But I have a mom who contributed greatly. I also had a dad who made our family not just make it through, but thrive. Okay? Because if the statistic is true, which I do not believe, that women make 70% of men, if you have a father figure in the home, even if he's the only worker, guess what? That means 20% or more money that you take home. Wow! That's 40% more. A man makes 40% more than a woman. So why wouldn't you want that? Because if it's true, which it isn't, that's if you average all jobs out, but if that were a true thing, then having a father figure, even if he's the only wage earner, would mean there was 40% more money just because there's a male in the house who's working. Even if it's Homer Simpson that you think is a complete nutter. Okay? Because Homer Simpson is a nuclear engineer. I know a few of them. I know what the starting pay is. I can only imagine how much money he could have been taking home, assuming Mr. Burns wasn't ripping him off. It's a very lucrative career, and yet he is treated as if he is worthless. What the hell? And then we look at our society as people complain about police, tear down statues, have kids by multiple men, and wonder, oh, I wonder what happened. Well, it's because Earth needs dads. Mars may need moms, but Earth needs dads. And a father is perhaps the most important thing that you could have in your life to help you to become a successful person. Now, you may not have a good father, and not all fathers are created equal, but having one is probably more beneficial than not having one at all. And I mean your father, not, stepfather, blah, 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 not even uncles and such, because I have some nieces and we have good interactions, but they do not and they cannot compensate for the failure in a home created by the absence of a father in the home. So, I look at this and say, our society is doomed until and unless we start recognizing the value of fathers, encouraging men to become them, and then teaching women to pick a man with whom to start a family and have kids who would be a good father. Forget whether he looks good shirtless or brings home the bacon. Those are things that at the end of the day can be made up for with other things. Because we all know that being a good mate is not determined by whether or not he has a six-pack or can put one down in an evening, but by what he does with his children and his wife at the end of the evening. If he is violent, if he is drunk, if he is selfish, if he is self-centered, then he cannot be a good exemplar, teacher, and trainer for his kids. A man who is devoted to having a six-pack ab or to putting down as many six-packs as possible is a man who is focused on himself. And a man who focuses on himself cannot be a good father, cannot be a good leader, cannot be a good exemplar, and is totally, totally unfit to tell anyone else what to do in their house. So, caveat here. I have my house in order. I do not claim to be an expert on fatherhood because I am not a father. I've never had any kids. I was married. I don't know if I know how to be a good husband because I don't know if the reason I'm not married anymore is all my fault. I'm sure that I made mistakes that contributed to the dissolution of my marriage. I don't have any kids, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know how to be a dad. I can tell you that since I had one, I told a guy yesterday, I was paying for my carpet, and he said he had to look up what day it was. I said, I know what day it is because it's the day after Father's Day, so I knew it was the 22nd of June. And he said, I'm not a father. And I said, neither am I, but I have one. I have a dad. I know who he is. I know where he lives. I know what he can do. And if you look around my house, there are things here that my dad made possible. I have furniture in the bedroom. I have flooring downstairs. I have decorations and things that my dad made possible, either because he donated the material or because he contributed the labor to make it so. A real dad, a real parent, whether you're a father or a mother, sacrifices their life to make the life of their children better. And I don't mean like you give up everything, but my mom would eat what we call the Andy Bendies on the loaves of bread so we could have the better bread. And she would take the burnt parts of the food so we could have what we wanted. My mom still ate, she just didn't eat the prettiest parts. And my dad, he still did what he wanted to do, just not as frequently because one of the things that was important to him was taking care of his family. And I will always be grateful that he did that. Earth needs dads. We need fathers. And what we need to start doing is treating men as if men matter. As if men are an important part of our species and not something with which we can simply dispense and that things will be better. There is a lie being promulgated that if women ruled the world, there would be no wars, just a bunch of women sitting around not speaking to each other. If you watch women in a workplace, it's hidden behind a paywall now, but the Wall Street Journal did an article in 08 or 09 called The Tyranny of the Queen Bee, which dictates and describes what happens when women are supervisors for other women. And I think when it comes down to it, it does take both sides of the coin to make things work. The yin and the yang, the balance, the different talents, the skills, knowledge, and abilities that make men men and women women coming together to raise a child. I don't think it takes a village to raise a child, but it does take both parents. And if not, both parents are not present and participating, then the children will not turn out as well as they could, even if of their own volition they become good people. Because no matter what the parents do, sometimes children go astray. And even if the parents suck, sometimes children excel. But having a good home with good parents is the best predictor of future success in life. I think, anyway. For those of you out there who are dads, who are good dads especially, thank you for what you do for your children. Thank you. Happy Father's Day. Godspeed. Take care of yourselves.